1964 Nobel Peace Prize speech in Oslo, Norway, Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself." He said something within had reminded Black Americans of their birthright of freedom. And he reached out to the oppressed masses around the world when he said that Black Americans were moving with a great sense of urgency toward the promised land of racial justice, together with their Black brothers of Africa and brown and yellow brothers in Asia, South America and the Caribbean. In 1959, King traveled to India, the land of Mahatma Gandhi, whom he said was the person who had informed his actions more than anybody. He said in a radio interview that Gandhi's philosophy of passive, non-violent resistance was the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for justice and human dignity. Like most African Americans, Dr. King was also drawn to Africa. He attended Ghana's Independence Day celebrations in 1957 and Nigeria's presidential inauguration in 1960. But he never made it to the shores of South Africa. In 1965, he called for an international boycott of the oppressive white apartheid regime. A few months later, that government denied him an entry visa into South Africa. At the time, South Africa's Nelson Mandela had begun serving what would become 27 years in prison, beginning at the notorious Robben Island. Mandela and Martin Luther King Jr. never met, but the legacies of these two great historical figures will forever be linked by their struggle for justice and racial equality. And years later, when Nelson Mandela addressed the US Congress as President of South Africa in 1994, he quoted Dr. King's iconic immortal words, "Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last." Rene, Carme, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.